even keeping somebody on your roster and not using that, to me, there's a little bit.
Welcome to another episode of Caleb Deep Dive, here with Joe Keeney. What is the difference at a practical level about how you're doing this with a small company versus a massive company? Hey guys, welcome to another episode of KLF Deep Dive. I'm here with Joe Keeney, and the topic we're going to talk about is speaker programs, and we're going to get into some of the nuances associated with that. But before we get started, Joe, tell us about yourself.
I've been actually in the life sciences industry for going on about 15 years, eventually working for Galderma, a company that works in different portfolio spaces with consumer products, biologics, and prescriptive medicine, as well as medical devices. So compliance wasn't really something that I had dreamt of injecting myself into, but it was something that just kind of came about organically, and that's kind of how things landed, really.
When you're organizing a speaker program, what is the difference at a practical level about how you're doing this with a small company versus a massive company?
Well, I honestly think the fundamentals are the same, and that they translate across really the size of any type of organization that you're working. We often hear adages or cliches of, compliance isn't one size fits all, but I still think like certain fundamentals apply. And a lot of it's based on pragmatism and sound business principles. Then, of course, we're always bound to adhere to the law, adhere to the codes, whether it's pharma code or AVIMED code. And at the end of the day, you've really got to have certain mitigating controls in place.
At a practical level, if you're being told by your by the CMO, by the chief marketing officer, or from the chief scientific officer, that we want to have a compliance program around the training that we're doing, around the education that we're doing, around the marketing that we're doing, and have a speaker program associated with that, how do you begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a good starting point with like all compliance programs, regardless of, again, size, is having really genuine conversations with the different silos, if you will. And silos often kind of gets like a negative connotation, but meeting with the individuals of various business units to kind of figure out like what are your real plans, and where I think feeds into really the 7 elements of an effective compliance program. That's often an input for like what your training program looks like. And so training's interesting because there are some aspects of training which is kind of rote, in the sense that you are looking to provide compliance training to every new hire that comes through your organization. But at the same time, there's also kind of like a higher level conversation that goes on with leaders to kind of educate them and demonstrate kind of like what are the pitfalls out there, and like how other companies have gotten into some snags, particularly when you're talking about how promotional programs are used, for example.
A company that's relatively small, and the one I'm thinking about, they had a speaker program where they basically said, oh, we already know the best speakers to have, because these people are either already on our board, or these people are people we've worked with in the clinical trials. We just wanted them to continue speaking. So whatever they need to get, we're just going to make sure that we do this. And they need to be happy. We need to be happy. Everyone's sort of, patients are getting, everyone's getting trained appropriately. No problem. Is that right, Joe? Or is there more to that?
Where a lot of different employees or companies can go wrong, and this is just kind of like surveying the landscape, is that the notion, when you've kind of alluded to it, of relationship building, it sets up or tees up nicely to something that could ultimately become a violation of the federal anti-kickback statute. And that's why we're so preoccupied with Speakers Bureau programs. It's not only the fraud alert that was issued by the OIG back in November 2020, but it again still remains to be something that the federal government and even the state's attorney generals are very much keen to understanding, what's going on. So generally, when we're looking to just hire healthcare professionals, whether it's in the Speakers Bureau context or it's the advisory board context, ultimately, we're trying to figure out how can we meet the elements of the safe harbor. Ultimately, the way that you really need to run your organization and the way the compliance program needs to have oversight is around legitimacy. Is this individual truly qualified to carry out what it is that we want to do?
Enjoying our content? We'd love to hear more. Please like, comment, share, and find more.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, this is not legal advice. This is not compliance advice. This is just a general discussion for educational reasons. An easy thing that a lot of people do is here's what the fraud alert looked like and here's what they considered. So all we have to do is sort of backtrack from that and go, you said alcohol should not be served. Let's not serve alcohol. You said that we should have appropriate training that goes along with it. So you sort of go down that checklist and sort of backtrack from that. Obviously, a lot of people say that's good enough, but you're taking that next step. You're basically saying what you should also do is tie that into the actual safe harbor, which, for example, in this case, might be the personal services exemption. If you are talking about the personal services exemption, I haven't seen this done very often, which is why I'm asking this question. It usually has a minimum period of 1 year. And that's where it gets more complicated because you may not know how long this campaign is going to last, how long you want them to actually speak. What do you do in that scenario?
Yeah. So, and this is another thing I think where companies need to be cognizant of is not really, you've got to, again, I guess discipline might be a little bit of the word of the day. The way that I see it anyway, is that in terms of your roster with what you have with a Speakers Bureau program, I think it has to be, and I don't like this phraseology particularly, but it needs to be kind of narrowly tailored to like where your business is right now. There's got to also be reflection on how many HCPs need to actually be on your bureau.
When you're doing this analysis, let's say you have the right number of people in place. You're talking about a fixed number of HCPs who will be speakers. Do you still try to get them in for a year? And does that make sense overall, given that you don't know how this particular program might play out?
Once you've kind of evaluated a speaker at a certain point, and you can kind of decide whether that individual fits the game for what you're trying to do, I think it's good hygiene to evaluate whether they stay on or not. I think it should be actually bespoke on every company to figure out, okay, how many more chances does somebody get? How effective are they in delivering really on the content? And I think that makes more compliance sense. Even keeping somebody on your roster and not using them, to me, there's a little bit of an indirect remuneration aspect. And what I mean by it is that an HCP can say, oh, yeah, I'm on so-and-so's Speakers Bureau program, but by golly, you learn that they've only been used once. And maybe there's opportunity for them to say that to many other companies.
Follow our page on LinkedIn.
I love that. I'm going to ask one last question just to keep it, because we could keep talking about this for like forever, because there's so much to discuss. Specifically, the question I have is, in this specific instance, this salesperson told me, we give $10,000 per talk. And I was like, when you say the word per talk, what does that mean? Do you mean the first time they have to present it because it takes a certain amount of time to create it, to present it? Or does it drop off after the first, I don't know, 3 talks that they give or 5 talks that they give? Or because you got to keep editing? Or do you just, every time they talk, you give them $10,000? And in that specific instance, I was told, no, it's every time they talk. I'm curious from a compliance standpoint, he was like, I'm not going to reapproach compliance. We're scared of them anyways. We're scared of legal anyways. We don't want to keep asking them if this is something we should keep doing, because they already okayed it. Like, why am I going and poking that bear all over again? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that first, before you even come up with the number, you need to really do some benchmarking on the level of effort that it takes to really learn actually the marketing presentation. And what's kind of interesting about that, and it's kind of a form of irony, is that if you have to spend so much time learning the material, then why in the heck have you been selected? So that's the irony there. But I think it always makes good sense to also double check with like a good life sciences third-party organization. You know, the players out there. I'm not going to necessarily name any of those particular companies.
Could you name a couple just so people know what the players might look like? Because I think people are always surprised what to even look at.
I mean, there are several. I mean, you know, Deloitte comes to mind. There was Navigant out there. There's the players with Porzio, IQVIA, and there are smaller shops as well. Depending on like what your needs are. I know of a company, Trestle Compliance. And I'm missing some, but there are a lot of folks that can just be another set of eyes onto like what your needs are. And, you know, they use a lot of objective criteria in developing what the fair market value looks like. I would say from a compliance perspective internally that you have to also express with them what's unique about your engagement. So I think it's being and working with a partner that's willing to listen to what your individual organization's needs are. You know, it's a lot to do with documentation. Unfortunately, we don't have, from a congressional perspective or in the CFRs, oh, well, fair market values this or fair market values that.
Yeah.
We don't have that grace. So I think it's all about doing the diligence.
I love it.
That's what I was.
Joe, we could keep going, like I said, but we do need to call it. So here's my question. How can people reach you if they have questions?
Yeah, I mean, my contact information is out there on LinkedIn. Somewhat new to social media. This is kind of like my entry point with social media. But I'm available on LinkedIn. All my contact information's out there, and happy to chat with anybody. See if anybody wants to pick my brain.
Sounds awesome. Joe, thank you again for coming on.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Ciao.
Call, click, or email.